when you talk about immigration, I always split immigration into two sides. I see the student immigration that is going to cause or is going to cause rental crisis. And then you talk about immigration in itself, where people are actually migrating to Australia, right? And so,
Yes.
I was reading some of these stats across the board, and they were saying that 70% of the cases that were there pending, the Labor government has basically come in and started giving these people right to enter into Australia. I have a few friends who waited 3 years during the COVID time to get their residencies and come into in Australia. And so I believe that there would be a lot of stories where people are coming into some of these things. You look at the Treasury forecast, the Treasury is talking about more than 300,000 people just migrating this year, 25% higher than any other year. And so that's superlicious numbers. These are massive numbers, right? And so if you think about some of these impacts and you combine this with students coming back, Chinese students, Indian students coming back because now they can study onshore rather than offshore,
Yeah.
I think the market dynamics completely changes, because we know that Malaysian, Singapore, China, India, when these students are coming in, the parents are keen to buy properties for these people, because it's an
Yeah.
investment, and and they can just live there while keeping their cost of living down.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. And it's a cycle as well, because we've got such a tight rental market. And we've seen this. It gets to a point where, when you're paying more in rent than you would in a mortgage, then it gets to a point where people make the decision as to, I might as well buy. I might as well buy. If it's that expensive to rent, I might as well buy. And so it just kicks off another cycle, right? But it does start with that rental pressure. And again, with this migration that's coming in, there are going to be more people that rent as well.
Yeah.
In the meantime, while they get accustomed to where they're living, and then they end up buying. So you can see where that whole knock-on effect happens as
Definitely.
well.
It's a very important point that you make, that especially with the migrations. I know from countries like India or Singapore or Dubai, right? These people are mature individuals who've been working half their life in these countries, right? And so when they land Australia, these are not poor people. They come with deposits ready to go, right? And so it's in their natural soul that property is a safe haven. You should always invest in property. They've been buying properties back home. And so naturally, they're like, okay, as soon as I come here, the first thing I do, 6 months down the track, I buy a property. And so that's the net migration impact that you would see is causing, or would cause the prices to go up. And that's what media is indicating. I think some of the key statistics, if we tend to look at it, and I'm talking more from the population statements made by the Treasury. There are high and low scenarios that they're quoting, in relation to the migration scenarios. And so they are saying that by 2060, Australian population can get to either 39.2 million or about $49 million. And so, not dollars, people. And so that's a lot of people, right? Between now and 2060. And so, if you track back and think about some of these things, what does that really mean? I always say this, that no one in an Australian market wants the prices to go down. Naturally, everyone wants the prices to go up, right? And so people talk about first-home buyers and they say, oh, we should be helping first-home buyers entering into this space. Technically, they want the prices to be down only when they're buying, right? As soon as they've bought, they are fingers crossed, I want the prices to go up as well. And so if you look at the market dynamics, you're talking about 70% of the market, which is owner-occupiers, investors, 30% of the market, or less than 30%, even 20% of the market, which is first-home buyers. And so, of course, if 70 to 80% of the market wants the prices to go up, the prices would go up. And that's the muscle memory that people talk about, right? Because they are the one dictating and driving the market. The other important point to consider here, and this is going back to my grassroots level, right? And so you look at countries like Dubai, India, Singapore, even UK, people don't buy first homes. There is no sort of granted notion that, you are going to be born and this is your birthright of buying your first home. Okay. A lot of these times, the houses travel in generations and you get a house passed down through generation, right? And so I strongly feel that, the next 20 to 30 years for Australia is basically us going through that cycle. Okay. The houses prices would go down to that level of, the higher echelons where we're not talking about
Mm,
anymore about first home buyers, because the market is so far outreach from these people. And so we're talking about generational wealth, and
mm.
this difference of people having investment properties versus people looking for properties would be so massive and so big that people who have done well in these 20 years would be far ahead of the curve, rather than
Yeah.
people who are
That's such
still.
a that you raised such an interesting point there, and it's so true. I look at it now from a cultural perspective, being coming from an Asian culture. It is not, it's very rare for people to go and buy their first homes. I mean, back in the days, it is a generational thing, and I'm wondering if we get to that point because we are so ingrained, and the government obviously helps that, and so on and so forth. Because we were talking about stamp duty today. My husband asked about why do we pay stamp duty. I'm like, let's not go down that path, right? That's how the government earns its money. So, it wants transactions to happen. The government wants transactions to happen. And
Yes.
depending on what state, stamp duty makes a lot of money
Yeah.
for the government.
But
So,
can I pause you there? Can I just
we,
pause you there? Think
yeah,
about stamp duty. Why is the state government, or a lot of state governments, transitioning from the dependence of you changing hands and transitioning stamp duty into land tax? And so one of the
to
reasons,
land tax.
yeah,
Yes.
I feel is basically that reason, because they know that this transactional change would be lower and lower as people start buying less and less,
Yes.
and it's going through the generational wealth. And so they want
Yes.
to put that trigger in that, yeah, well, the property is created, we want money for infinity, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people are starting to, you get grandparents that live with you, your children are living there longer and things like that. We've got people who are living, building granny flats and all. So it is a very interesting transition away from that to a longer term land tax application. So not only from an affordability point of view, going, actually, we can make more money this way in the long term. Because it'd be interesting. We haven't looked at the statistics in terms of whether there are less transactions in that sense. Are people doing less of those? Is there a longer time that they're actually staying in that one property than it was before?
I think I've looked at some of this data more from a Victorian government perspective while consulting with the Department of Treasury. And I know that an average hold period in Victoria is somewhere around 8 years. And so that period has actually gone up. It's not coming down. And so if you look at the trend, that period keep going up. So people are not transacting or changing houses as often. And that's where the government is playing its part. And they're like, okay, in the short term cash flow side of things, we might make less money because transactional based. But as the pipeline keeps coming through on a longer term basis, if you look at 6 to 12 to 15 to 20 years, we actually make shit ton more money, right? And so,
Yeah,
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 that's
yeah,
definitely the case.
yeah, absolutely.